Good morning, colleagues, and good morning to participants in today's workshop. Just by show of virtual hand, can you just indicate that you can hear me well and you can also see this window that I've shared with you? All right, thank you so much. I see an indication that you can all hear me and you can see what I've shared with you from this side. Let me once again greet you and thanking you for being participants in today's session. And I welcome you to the Research Capacity Development Unit, University of Johannesburg workshop on principles of effective data visualization. I'm Dr. Gabriel Monyera, and I'll be the moderator for the session for today. So why are we looking at this, important issue of how data should be visualized effectively? So I think this is a crucial, it is an important topic since we visualize in our research that we do, we ought to visualize data in different forms, in one form or the other. And if you use proper, data visualization tools, that will enable, the risk to try to avert the risk of misinterpretation of the data that you are presenting. Also, if you apply the principles of clarity, accuracy, relevance, and consistency, then data visualization on its own can communicate key insights quickly and meaningfully to a diverse audience. You see, so sometimes it's good to speak in form of images. So that could be, graphs and other tools that you can use for visualization. So I think it is a very important and crucial topic that will be, conversing on or having a conversation on today. But before we continue, let me remind you that this session is being recorded, and also take this time to thank the facilitator for her efforts with preparing and facilitating the session for today. But before I introduce the facilitator, here are some housekeeping rules. If you have a question during the presentation, feel free to raise your virtual hand if you'd like to speak, or you can type your question in the chat box. Alternatively, then I can bring that to the attention of the facilitator. And also, like I've said before, the session is being recorded and the presentation slides will be requested from the presenter. Both the recording and the slides will be uploaded to our Moodle communities by the end of the week, just after we verify the suitability of the content. Then also a feedback survey will be posted on the chat section during the course of this workshop. And I would like to kindly ask you to fill this out for us to gain insights on how useful the workshop was, and also to just help us, on how we can improve with preparations for future workshops. Also, your feedback as well will provide it to the facilitators so that they can be able also to see how useful that the workshop has been to the participants. Let me remind you that we launched the RCDMS, the Research Capacity Development Management System, last that was in March, in April, on the 14th of April. So we launched the Research Capacity Development Management System, and we are gradually migrating to this new system. So the system is the one that we are now using for streamlining our events and all the services that we offer as the Research Capacity Development Unit. So that includes workshops, research writing consultations, and with this, you can stay up to date with the events and services in one place. And so we just actually label it as a one-stop access for all the RCD events and services. So we encourage you to register to utilize this system that is accessed through the U-Link under the services tab, or by visiting the www.rcdms.org rcdms.uj.ac.za. I will also post that information in the chat box. Then let me introduce the facilitator for today, Ms. Motala, and I'll read the bio of Ms. Motala in your hearing. So Ms. Motala has worked in the Department of Multimedia Design since February 2020. That is here at the UJ. She's a digital designer with a background in agent-related work and more recently the academic space. Her fields of interest include design thinking, speculative design, 4IR, storytelling, and interactive media with a focus on the intersection of visual communication, interactive participation. Ms. Motala uses a range of techniques in her work, including illustration and frame and digital animation, photography, and film. Her current research involves experimenting with medium of interactive animated film as a means of creating social change in South Africa. So I'm delighted to hand over to Ms. Motala, having introduced her, who will be leading us through the workshop for today. And, Ms. Motala, we appreciate your presence. We appreciate your time and your expertise. And we look forward to the valuable insights that you are going to share with us during the course of this workshop. And I hand over to you, Ms. Motala. I will stop sharing and you can share your screen from here henceforth.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so we should be able to see my presentation now. Yes?
Yes, we can see it. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so welcome to the Principles of Effective Data Visualization. I will say that my focus today is going to be more on how we present what we present, of course, because that varies between us as researchers. Essentially, what today I'll be looking at is an introduction to data visualization, what it is, why it is important for us as researchers to be presenting our data in a way that is useful. We're going to look at the types of data visualizations that exist. We'll look at some examples that I've found. We'll also look at frameworks for how to create these data visualizations in a way that is appealing. And within those frameworks, we'll look at certain design principles, such as information architecture. So I will be introducing you to some design terms, and at the end, we can have a nice discussion session about it. All right, so to get started, what is data visualization? When we think of data visualization, we really think about the traditional form of it, right, with numbers and charts and graphs. So realistically, what data visualization is it's the use of graphics and diagrams to visually represent data sets in a manner that is engaging and aesthetically pleasing. Now, generally, when we engage with existing graphs and charts, we're familiar with those that are created in Excel and really like data analysis softwares. A lot of these are not very interesting to look at. When we actually focus more heavily on something like data visualization, when we actually include it as part of our process of presentation and preparing ourselves to present, we create these visuals that are far more engaging and interesting for our readers. So the aim is to take something that is really analytical, like numbers, like your quantitative data, and then create an image, a graphic, that can be more accessible to our readers. Accessible meaning in terms of keeping them engaged. Okay, so the way that we present data is incredibly important to how we allow people to understand what it is we are talking about. So it's about influencing our readers' opinions. It's about facilitating a space where they can understand what we are discussing. So we have to understand what the data is that we are presenting. We have to understand that it moves beyond just the traditional numbers and graphs that we are all familiar with, so like the bar charts, line graphs, and number tables. And we have to think of it more as an interactive medium by which we can have a conversation with our reader. So looking at data visualization in its traditional form can seem very boring. They are not very interesting to look at, let alone understand. One of the fundamental principles of users, and by users I mean anybody who is reading or engaging with our work, is that we have to maintain a sense of engagement. If we don't maintain a sense of engagement, our content, our presentations, our data, it's ineffective. And so we have to make sure that however we are presenting our data, however we are presenting information, has to remain interesting to our viewer. And this means incorporating certain elements of design, so visual design, into our infographics, into our charts and our graphs, so that we can maintain that reader engagement. When we actually look at this as a whole section of our process, when we specifically look at incorporating design and design principles into data visualization, we are really talking about something called information architecture. Now, information architecture, it sounds like it's a really complex term, but really what it is it's organization. It's approaching your infographics and your data visualizations from a perspective that this is not going to be just read by you, but it's going to be read by all of these other people, many of whom you will never meet. And so you will never be there to actually explain to them what your data means, what your graphs mean. So the infographic, the data visualization, has to act as a standalone piece that can be understood by anybody, regardless of where they are from, who they are, their background, and so on. The idea is to make information accessible through the use of visual design. So if we look at information architecture, it is the art of organizing, structuring, and designing information in a manner that is easy to follow and understand. So it underpins a lot of what I do as a digital media designer does within my field, especially within the field of something like app design or web design. In order to create an effective experience of information, we have to make sure that that information is organized in a manner that is appropriate so that it can facilitate this learning. So it is based in user experience or user UX design, but it can be applied across a range of media and fields. So within the field of research, for example, we can use information architecture in our data visualization, but also in the way that we set up a research paper, how readable we make something. We can use it within the context of something like film, creating stories and narratives and organizing that information in a way that our viewer or audience can follow it in a manner that is coherent. So information architecture as this broad field centers around the following principles: organization, navigation, labeling, findability, and usability. These are the 5 core values of information architecture that can be applied across a range of media. If we look at these more in depth, we're looking at these principles as the center point of that interaction between our user, the content, which in this situation would be our data, and the context, so the context of our research. So starting with organization, we're looking at organizing our content or our data in a way that is logical and easy to follow. So this means categorizing information, grouping it together. A lot of this comes out of your initial data analysis. All we are doing here is taking that organization, that categorization from data analysis and applying it to actual visualization. Navigation is this idea that our content or our data can be followed very easily. So anybody reading it would be able to understand what we are trying to say just by looking at an infographic, for example. So we create these visual pathways in our information that allows our readers to follow that information to a general conclusion. Labeling is when our categories, the way that we have organized our information, is labeled correctly and consistently. This means that we're using consistent terminology throughout to refer to certain parts of our data. We are also allowing ourselves to use those terms to describe what kind of data sets we are referring to. And we have to make sure that that language is consistent so that our readers are actually able to follow what we are trying to say. Findability is how we make our information easy to locate. So this is, for example, a table of contents. at the beginning of a journal article allows you to navigate that article very easily because it's labeled everything and because there's clear instructions of where to find that information. And then finally, usability. So usability, while not necessarily so important in something like research, is important in general in information architecture because it allows our users or our readers to engage with the information in a way that is effective for them. So this idea that someone could read your data and find it to be useful. Moving on, if we look at how we can take these principles of information architecture and actually apply it to data visualization, is that we have to look at our visualization as a tool not for us, but for our readers. Ultimately, those that engage with your data visualizations, with your infographics, these are people that are reading your research and trying to come to the same sort of conclusion as you have, trying to understand how you came to your conclusions. So we have to understand it as more of a conversation. It's a conversation between you, the author or the researcher, and the people reading your research. And so approaching it from the perspective of storytelling allows us to do that because it kind of takes something that is inherently natural for human beings, which is conversation and storytelling, and it applies it to talking about something like data. So when we talk about visualizing data, we're really talking about visualizing storytelling. We're telling the story of our data, of our research, to someone who is reading our paper. So it is an opportunity for us to actually talk about what we've researched in a way that is engaging and useful. In doing so, we can consider these key principles: clarity and purpose, knowing our audience, who they are, the focus of our research, of our data, and keeping our visualization simple, visual hierarchies, which refers back to this organizational aspect that I have touched on, and then narrative. So how narrative and storytelling can factor into how we communicate with people. If we look at something like clarity and purpose, so this is about presenting your information in a way that is clear to our readers. This means that all our data should be easy to understand. We shouldn't need our readers to go and do their own level of research in order to understand what it is that we are trying to say. Our data has to clearly present itself as this finished idea. So the point of our data, the reason why we've performed this research, the reason why we are presenting this data has to be clear from the onset. In order to do this, there are a set of questions that you'll need to answer for yourself. What data am I presenting? Because from a research perspective, there might be many different kinds of data that emerge out of our actual process. So we have to actually select which parts of that data we would need to present as an infographic or as a visualization in order to assist our reader in understanding our research point, our research purpose. So we have to make sure that the data that we are actually going to present is data that is applicable to the experience of the reader. We want to make sure that it actually adds value to the experience that our reader is having. So we have to consider what data we are presenting, how it then relates to our main research. Is there a way that I can visually connect my main research purpose with the data that I have collected and visualized? In presenting my data, is the message or main point of it clear? Am I actually visualizing the conclusion that the reader is supposed to reach from this data? If I'm using data to back up a statement that I've made, have I made that statement clear to my reader? And is the data easy to understand? A lot of us, depending, of course, on the field within which we practice, find numbers to be a little bit boring or difficult to understand. So as the researcher, as the person visualizing or presenting your data, is your data easy to understand for someone who has never come into contact with your research? And by this, I mean visually. So if we were working, for example, with percentages, with statistics, how do we make those statistics engaging and interesting? And how do we make them easy to understand for the layperson, for someone who has no idea what you're talking about? The next point would be knowing your audience. And this is how we predict how people interact with information. We have to know who's going to be reading or engaging with our research. And this is a big part of everything that I do as a designer, but also as a researcher. I have to know who I'm talking to in order to communicate effectively. And this is what we call tailoring a message, tailoring your communication style to your audience. So these are factors such as age, because we wouldn't talk to, say, teenagers in the same way that we would talk to elderly persons, race or background, your nationality, gender identity, all of these things, these factors that make up an individual's identity impact the manner in which they communicate. And so in writing or presenting our information, we have to consider that our readers are all from these different backgrounds with different experiences, and we have to present information in a way that is accessible to them. So we have to consider who it is that is going to be reading or engaging with our research and our data. We have to consider their backgrounds, their experiences, whether this will be someone entirely outside of our field or whether it will be a peer within our field. We have to consider our communication style, how we as individuals communicate versus how others communicate. How should I word my data? How should I word my actual analysis? Should my presentation include interactive elements, especially when we're considering a new generation of researchers, when we're considering researchers who are perhaps Gen Z and now Gen Alpha, those who are growing up and interacting with research, interacting with data. If we look at something like these digital platforms, social media platforms, if we look at TikTok and how everything is short format, all content is much shorter, it's much quicker, it's much punchier. It's kind of overwhelming. We have to consider that there are a whole group of people who prefer to engage with information on that kind of level. And so when we're talking about presenting information, we have to consider this. We have to consider attention spans and how some people would prefer to interact with data, clickable elements, things that can be dragged across so that we actually maintain that audience engagement. All of this is about accessibility. If we don't consider the preferred methods of communication, we are not going to communicate effectively. It's all about catering towards your audience's needs. Then we can look at focus and simplicity. In this, we're talking again about organizing our information and making it easier to understand. So the aim with data visualization is really to create an understanding of a particular concept. And this concept is what is central to your research. If we overcomplicate the visualization, if we add too many details, then people may not understand what it is that you're trying to say. So when we are creating visualizations, they have to be focused and intentional. There has to be a purpose to them. And that purpose is something that you as a researcher just define for yourself. You have to figure out what it is that you're trying to focus on with a diagram. Why are we using a diagram? Is it easier to communicate this particular concept through the use of a visual aid? Or am I just doing it to make my paper look pretty? All right, so we have to understand what the purpose is for our diagram. What are we focusing on? What is the core point that we are trying to get across? Is my main point, this focus that I've identified, is it easy to follow and understand? In doing so, in understanding how complex it is, you can identify whether the diagram you've produced is too cluttered, whether there's too much information on it, whether your diagram actually needs to be two diagrams that sit one next to the other. And then, is my design too complex to understand? Perhaps if we're using a visual that is too convoluted, something that has too many details in it, it could be difficult to understand. So it's always important to remember that with data visualization, we have to be focused and intentional. We have to always refer back to this main point that we are trying to make with this visualization, with this infographic. Then we can look at visual hierarchies. So this is a way of organizing data, and there are many ways of doing this, depending on the data itself. But we have to visualize it. So understanding data through analysis is one thing, presenting it as another. How do we actually take that information that we've analyzed and categorized and create a visual design that demonstrates this? For example, when we're showing a data set that may have many subsets to it, and those subsets could have subsets, we can use things like color, size, font, and position to demonstrate all of these different sections of the data in a way that is easy to understand and follow. When we talk about categorizing information like this is a visual hierarchy. So we have to understand that our visualizations have to have a visual language to them, meaning colors that refer to certain subsets or sizes referring to different subsets. That is the way that we are communicating this hierarchy. Have I organized my information in a coherent manner? Is my organizational structure easy to understand? A simple way to see visual hierarchy is by looking at any presentations that you've experienced. In presentations, such as the one that I'm using right now, there are different ways of making hierarchies clear. For example, my headings are all in bold. They're all in all capitals. They've got a bit of a shadow behind them. My body text is all in plain type, and then anything that I would like to emphasize is bold. This is a visual hierarchy that then allows my readers, my audience, to actually determine which information is most important and which is least important. We can apply the same kind of concept to data visualization. We can identify visually which parts of the data we feel have proven to be more important or more useful, and which have been less important and less useful, by just visualizing it, by using things like bold or like italics, using colors and changing them around. All right, so we have to make sure that we are using a visual language to demonstrate these hierarchies, and these hierarchies then promote a level of understanding in our viewer or our audience. And then finally, looking at narratives. So I touched on something called storytelling. Now, when we talk about storytelling, a lot of us think of just fiction stories. But really, storytelling is how humans interact with one another. It's how we converse. We tell stories about our experience, about our lives, about something that may have happened. And so in approaching something more formal like data visualization, from the perspective of storytelling, allows you to treat a topic with the same sort of casual attitude as you would a conversation with a peer. And so when we're talking about storytelling, we're really talking about conversation. It's a conversation between you, the researcher, and your reader, the person who is engaging with your information. And so if we treat data visualization like storytelling, it allows us to think more from a more imaginative perspective about how we present things. If we talk about data visualization from purely an analytical perspective, it's going to be listing things. If we talk about it like a story, we'll tell people why the data actually looks this way, what has made it this way. And so to assist with this, I've set up a bit of an analogy for this. So when we're talking about stories, there is a beginning, there is a middle, and there is an end. Within data visualization, we can see the beginning as setting up the context. So the context of your research, why you collected this data. The middle would be talking about your findings. What is the data and what is it showing? And at the end is actually reaffirming that main point, the focus of the research. If we take this and apply it to visuals, it will look something like the examples that I've put together. Now, we will look at several examples, but really over the next couple of sessions that I'm facilitating, I'll be going into more depth over the design principles because it's easier to visually demonstrate this, how to use the design principles in software to create data visualizations and infographics that incorporate stories. These examples that I've included, I will just give a brief analysis to demonstrate all that I've just said. So the first one is one that I had earlier on in my presentation. This is an infographic about vegetarianism. And you can see that there are very traditional charts included, the pie charts, but the way that they are incorporated tells a story, because we've got these characters of the vegetables and an avocado. The characters have a personality to them, and that makes them more personable. Including as a form of illustration like this makes your information far more accessible to children, right? Because these are these friendly characters, they have these facial expressions. So we're taking a data set that is made up of numbers and we're giving it a personality. In doing so, we make that information more accessible because people are more willing to interact with something that is friendlier from the onset. Now, this particular infographic, it has a lot of data incorporated into it. The avocado character has information about why people choose to be vegetarian. Down at the bottom left, we've got information on health risks associated with being a vegetarian. But the way that this information, the way that these numbers are presented is in a manner that is more friendly. So the information itself is still there, but the feeling in looking at it is different. This is not an unfriendly image because of things like the characters. We can also look at things like consistency in color use, the varying shades of green throughout, especially when we look at things like the pie charts, how each data set is defined by a particular color, a shade of green. We can look at hierarchies. The pie charts are different sizes. There's the largest pie chart, reasons for a vegetarian lifestyle, and then you've got 3 smaller pie charts. And this is dictating to us, the reader, which of the data sets is seen as more important or more pertinent to the overall goal and which is seen as less important. So you can see that there are visual hierarchies in terms of categorizing information, not just in terms of the type of information, but how important it is to the reader. The second example is coffee facts. And this also has incorporated certain characters. Again, very friendly. There is still consistency in terms of the visuals, the designs. So we've got this consistent use of grays and reds, but we've still got this organization, this hierarchy. The biggest thing on the page that stands out the most to us is the 65%. And it stands out the most because it's the largest. So we can immediately assume that that statistic, 65% of coffee consumption takes place during breakfast hours. We can assume that that is the most important piece of data that we should engage with. And then afterwards, we'll start to look at all of these other pieces of data. So we can see that the person who has created this infographic has chosen which information should be the most important and which is least important. But this consistency throughout allows us to engage with all of the data in conjunction to one another. The use of something like illustration makes the data more friendly in terms of reading it. The use of things like coffee cups to show what popular brewing methods there are. This visualization of the data means that we engage with it in a manner that is more open. Because if someone listed, for example, the contents of an espresso versus an Americano versus a latte, I wouldn't engage with that information in the same way because I would be reading a full list rather than looking at a diagram. Many people are visual learners, and so actually creating infographics that incorporate illustrations allows people to learn in an easier way. We can look at something like this, which is perhaps more creative, which is the composition of a chai latte. Okay, so they've of course had an artist create this wonderful illustration, but in allowing it to be an illustration, we actually are able to put a visual to the word because we can all visualize what ginger looks like, but actually seeing it as part of this drink creates an entirely different experience. We're now seeing the richness of chai, the rich flavors, the different ingredients. And this is all through the use of illustration. And then we can look at something like this. So this is about gender-based violence in Tamil Nadu in India. And this illustration, this infographic is very interesting because it's got this impactful illustration right at the top. And that is the first thing really that we see. We see this image of a woman and she is distressed. And that's what actually draws us in. Because a lot of visual design is about capturing someone's attention and then maintaining it. The thing that captures our attention with this image is the illustration of the woman. And then only afterwards do we actually start seeing the statistics. So we can see that the hierarchy starts with the illustration and then it moves into the statistics and the titles, uncomfortable truths, or the 69%, 44.6%. And upon first looking at this, the reason behind this is not clear. We can't really read what's underneath it because the writing that's underneath is very small, but the statistics sized like that and positioned as they are by each of the women's hands actually draws us in and makes us want to engage more with this piece, makes us want to actually read about the piece. All of this is to do with the principles that I've already discussed. Organization, positioning, creating these hierarchies, and leading your reader through a particular layout from the most important element all the way through to the least important element, because we're trying to maintain this consistent engagement between our reader and our content and our data. And then we've got Coca-Cola. So this infographic is just statistical information about Coca-Cola as a drink when it first started. And here they're playing really into the recognizable aspect of the Coke brand. So bringing through that logo design, the bottle design, and actually incorporating the colors of the brand throughout. So on the left-hand side, you've got this timeline of the drink and how it was first invented and when it became really big. And then on the right-hand side, you've got statistics about the current consumption of this beverage. So incorporating, again, the use of illustrations, the use of aesthetic consistency, things like color, things like sizing and spacing to create hierarchies, it actually creates an image that is very engaging, that we want to continue reading. Final two examples that I have are based in nature. So the first on the left is about butterflies, where again, very illustration heavy. Starts with the anatomical description of the butterfly, where its wings are, what are they called? And then underneath it, we've got the life cycle of the butterfly. Now you'll notice that the written information isn't very much, it's mostly visual. And that's important because, like I said, people learn visually. We like to look at pretty things. And so incorporating a certain aesthetic, incorporating illustrations into our data visualizations actually facilitates learning because it keeps people interested in what we are showing. The idea is to maintain that consistent viewer engagement, and we do that by maintaining a consistent aesthetic. The same is for the one on the right, which was released by the Canadian government about climate change. We've got statistics, we've got percentages, we've got data, but it really centers around the illustration, the use of illustration to communicate these ideas. And each of those statistics has a particular illustration that corresponds to it. Something like annual average air temperatures warming has a flame next to it. Something like river flow has what looks like water next to it. It's about creating this visual consistency and actually continuously reminding our viewer of those visual elements that play a role into where these statistics came from. Okay, so I hope this has given you guys a lot to think about. I would like to have a discussion session, if possible. Of course, this was just an introduction. I will be going into more depth with all of this stuff as we look at the software types and how to actually produce data visualization. And of course, after these sessions, you can feel free to reach out to me by email if you have any questions, want to run ideas past me. I'm really open to that. So are there any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ms. Motala, for a wonderful presentation. I think it was very insightful. I just want a confirmation from the participants that you can still hear me. Just a show of virtual thumb. Okay, thank you so much. So I think This was a very, like I said in my opening, is a very important topic. Sometimes we are just faced with, these visuals, but we don't really know how to integrate that into our text. When I was following the conversations, there are, sort of these themes that continued, or these keywords that continued to come out, throughout the presentation of Ms. Motala, the issue of clarity, accuracy, relevance, and consistency. So I think it's very important. Sometimes, when we look at the work that is submitted before us to review by students, or even sometimes by other peers in academics, you just see this graph, but you can't tell what it is for. Maybe there's nothing that is being said, about that. That it's just like a visual that has just been dumped in the in the text. I think with that, Ms. Motala, can I maybe possibly ask a question that what are the important rules that guide the inclusion of visuals in text, especially in an academic context? Like, for example, you can't just have a figure without talking about it or making reference to it. Sometimes you see a person presenting data in a table, but then rewriting again the data in a paragraph. Like maybe the table is having 1 to 10. Then you write again that, as you can see on the table, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right. So what is it that you can share with us, regarding that? Thank you.
Right. So I think there are a lot of reasons to include data visualization and actually interesting graphics in research. I don't think that it's being used. I don't think the tool is being used to its full potential in most research, because it's not about presenting your data and then, like you said, just talking about it again. I think when it comes to actual infographics and things like this, it's more about providing this additional layer of understanding. So one example of this would be, as a researcher, we have to do a lot of reading. We have to do like literature reviews. And sometimes we can't read through an entire article. We want a summary of it, right? So an infographic can actually act as that summary. It can be an additional document that can be included where it summarizes the information, so that then we know whether we should read the full paper or not, whether it would be useful for us to actually go and read more about it. The other way that it can be used is to create connections.
Thank you so much for that answer to the question, Ms. Motala.
Yes.
Let me just, for the participants, let me allow your microphone so that if you have any question or any contribution that you would want to make to this discussion that we are having, you can simply unmute your mic and then share with us your question or your contribution. So I've allowed the mic of all the attendees. It is now, the onus is now upon you to make sure that your mic is muted. Only when you are the one talking, then you can unmute the mic. And I just open the floor for questions and discussions to all the participants.
Hi, Ms. Mutala. Thank you for a wonderful talk.
Hi, thanks.
All
Thank you for
right.
joining.
Thank you. So I have two questions. Firstly, I didn't get the last part. You were addressing the question by Dr. Gabriel, but I think you were cut off there. I was just trying to understand. You were saying that the visuals basically is another layer of understanding. So can you please complete what you were saying? Because I needed to understand that. And then when you're done with that, then I'll ask the second one.
Okay, perfect. So this additional layer of understanding that I'm talking about is that when we engage with any sort of media, we engage with content on a daily basis, we always create our own assumptions about what it is that we might be reading or watching. We create our own idea of what is being said. We come to our own conclusions, and that's just how we function. So when we use data visualizations, that's a way of kind of providing our readers with the conclusion that they should come to. or that we want them to come to. So it's one thing to read an article, but actually seeing the story that it's creating is completely different. I could tell a story about one of my own experiences, and my viewer, my audience, might get an entirely different meaning from it. So if I were to show that story, then there would be this additional layer of meaning. It's like allowing someone to come to their own conclusions versus telling them what my conclusions were and asking if they agree, if that makes sense.
Yes. Thank you so much. That does totally make sense. Uh, so the second one is your PowerPoint slides. Did you get it? Did you like make it yourself, or did you get it from a website? Because it's very well done.
Thank you. So I made it myself, but I use for all of my teaching slides, I use a platform called Canva.
Okay.
Yeah, because Canva is really useful if you have to do a lot of presentations. It provides you with well-designed templates that you could just build on, and then they'll look really great. But that's something that I think I'm going to include in my next session where I'm demonstrating PowerPoint. I will touch on Canva and how to use it as well if you're attending that.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you, Ms. Motala. Let me just ask from the participants, we are also urging you to take part in these question and discussions that we are having. Alternatively, you can just type your question in the chat box. So, the participants, any questions that you are having, this is the time for you to ask. Whilst you are waiting, for the contributions or for questions from the participants, let me just also, let the audience know that we are still there are two more sessions that Ms. Motala will present for us. Tomorrow, there's a session on the use of data visualization tools, focusing on Microsoft PowerPoint. Then on the 8th of May, we have use of data visualization tools, but focusing on Adobe. Okay, so those are still outstanding workshops that Ms. Motala is going to facilitate for us. So they are actually building on also to the conversation that we are having today. So any questions? I see there's no questions from the audience. I also see that in the chat box there's no questions that the audience have asked. And with this, let me just ask from Ms. Motala if maybe we can now move into the closing phase of this workshop.
Yes, absolutely, we can. And I would just like to say that if anybody wants to think about all of this and then come back with questions or send me an email with questions, they can feel free to do so. I am available for that.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Motala. The details, the email address of Ms. Motala is there on the slides that she's sharing with you at the moment. So you can ask your questions via email if you are still pondering on what is it that you want to ask. But also with this, let me take this opportunity to thank all the participants, for taking your time, to be with us in this session. I also want to express our appreciation to Ms. Motala for agreeing and taking part, in preparing and the facilitation of the workshop that we had today. It's a lot of valuable insights that we have learned. And we are hoping that we will still be with you, the participants, we have took part in today's workshop, in the workshops that are going to be facilitated by Ms. Motala tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. I also want to remind the participants that we recently launched the Research Capacity Development Management System, and we are encouraging you to register on this system because this is the system that we will be migrating fully to. And if for you to be able to access our events and services, then it is only through this RCDMS that you are able to register. And for you to register on the system, you can access the registration link through the link under the services tab, or you can visit the RCDMS website at www.rcdms.uj.ac.za. If you need any information about the RCD, you can visit our website at www.uj.ac.za/postgraduate school/research capacity development. And for any inquiries that you might have, you can contact the RCD inquiries at uj.ac.za. I also want to remind you that I've posted the feedback survey in the chat section, for your access. Fill in this out for us so that we can be able to use the feedback that we get from you for our future preparations. And also by filling it, it ensures that you receive a certificate of attendance for this workshop. Allow me to thank Ms. Motala once again for agreeing and for facilitating the session. And I also thank you, the participants, for continuing to support the research capacity development unit. And with this, I'm now concluding this session and stopping the recording for the session, and wishing you all a great day further. Thank you.
Thank you. Great day to everybody. Bye.